Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome on into the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. What a fun weekend we had. I shot off some explosives in the air.
As did many people.
Legally or illegally, don't really know.
Yeah, and information to be disclosed.
Fun weekend, though. Hope you had a great 4th of July weekend. We never, did we wish them happy 4th of July on the last episode on Friday? I don't even remember.
I think so.
My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. We got some big news to get to today. We're going to talk about bounce back players as well. Before we do that, check out our website at thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter at the FFChamps, on Instagram at thefantasychampions. Like us at facebook.com/thefantasychampions. Subscribe wherever you are listening right now. Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment below and like this video. And then be sure to click the bell for notifications. Then leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. Rick, the draft guide, give us an update.
Look, the price is still the same. It's $25. What is in the draft guide? We got full rankings. We got breakouts. We got busts, player draft values, player breakdowns, and much more. And if you guys buy the draft guide right now, you have a chance to be entered into our listener league, which we will dominate. Just saying.
Yeah, take you down.
But if you guys are any confident, go ahead and try.
Go ahead and give it a shot. Be sure to tell your friends about it if you want to lose your league. Let's get to some news. We'll jump right into the news. I tried to keep it short. Lots of stuff going around the NFL, but I don't feel it's necessary to tell people what the Athletics writers think about Le'Veon Bell's prospects. So
good, because the shorter the news, the better.
So Mike Florio has reported that the NFL has officially decided to reduce the preseason to 2 games. The NFLPA is pretending that they have some kind of say in it, and they have voted.
They don't.
They have voted to make training camp, or to make the preseason entirely go away this year. So it'll probably end up being 1 or 2 games.
Preseason?
The NFLPA wants no preseason, and the NFL wants to play 2 games.
I think you need preseason.
Yeah.
At least a game or 2.
The NFLPA is moronic.
Yeah.
So anyway, we haven't talked much about the COVID effect that the NFL is going to experience this year. And it's not just the fact that people are discussing whether or not there's going to be football. If there's basketball, if there's baseball, if there's hockey, there will be football. Let's not worry about that. It's a question of who gets COVID-19 and doesn't play and is out for 2 weeks because they have COVID-19, and it ruins your fantasy prospects for the week. Or for 2 weeks, like the Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes owner who gets COVID-19.
That's going to happen all year.
It's going to happen, and it's going to be annoying. So depth matters this year more than anything. But we haven't really discussed the prospects of that. It doesn't surprise me that they reduced the preseason because it's the most meaningless thing on the face of the planet. According to reports, training camps are going to start on time still. So the only thing that they have changed or done at this point are taking those 2 preseason games away. So do you think we're going to play? And what kind of effect do you think it's going to have on the season?
I hope we're going to play.
Percentage chance we're going to play. What's your percentage chance?
I assume the NFL is going to play.
What's your percentage chance is what I asked.
I
didn't know if you heard me.
They're going to play?
Yes, that they're going to play. I didn't know if you heard me.
I'd probably say like 80%.
Okay, yeah. I'm about 90.
80 to 90%. I mean,
we'll give you some hope on this.
They might not have fans. That is something that I think could very well happen.
There was another report that said
fans to begin the season.
They want to hand out hand out waivers that if you you can go to the game, but if you contract COVID-19, it's not the NFL's responsibility or
Oh,
anyone
perfect.
else. Yeah. So
I mean, I hope they do that. If they do that, that's great. That's kind of what I'm hoping for. But no, I mean, the NFL, I feel like they're kind of in the mindset of they're going to play unless
they're too big
forced not to by somebody who's not the NFL.
Yeah.
By government.
Freaking stupid. Hate the government.
If they can play, they will play.
Yeah. I think the NFL is too big to not play. There's too much money involved, whether you're talking about like, obviously the fans not being in the stands and stuff like that is going to be a big money loss, but just not playing altogether. That means players don't get paid their contracts, that owners don't make any revenue on the season, that the NFL doesn't make money from their advertisers. Like no one gets paid in the NFL for an entire year. So they are going to play. Like they can't just up and say the season's done. We're not going to play this year. It's over. They would lose billions.
Right.
Like it would be ridiculous. So I think that the NFL is probably going to play. It's about 90%, 95%. Give you a little hope on a Tuesday afternoon. But I don't know what the effects are. It's going to be a tough fantasy football season. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, definitely.
Draft for depth. Handcuffs matter.
Yeah,
handcuffs
I was
matter.
going to say handcuffs and depth are so important this year.
On the same note,
even more than others.
On the same note, the NFLPA proposed 80-man rosters for the start of training camp instead of 90-man rosters. So they're going to try to trim down the start of where the rosters need to be at for training camp, which is interesting.
I think that's fair, honestly.
The NFL wants to do – they want to keep it 95. I mean, 90, I'm sorry. Obviously. But well, actually, the NFLPA wants to keep it 90. The NFL teams want to trim it to 75.
Whatever they do, just come to an agreement so we can play football.
It's freaking ridiculous. They all argue with each other. I'm like, you morons. Because I guess the players' agents are pissed off because there's going to be a lot of players who didn't get drafted, undrafted guys who are just going to lose their jobs because they didn't even get a chance to like try. Because they have to trim the rosters down.
There's a lot of undrafted players in the league. So,
but anyway, David Njoku requested a trade. Potential suitors been floating around New England. Obviously, always a suitor for David Njoku, I guess.
Always a suitor for anybody, especially a tight end.
Dallas has been out there. I heard Jacksonville too, but I don't know where. So David Njoku requested a trade. And then, I mean, I feel like the second they signed Gronk, Njoku was like, okay, they're going to trade him. And then they said, we're not going to trade him. Say it again?
You mean Hooper? You said Gronk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Forgive me.
Yeah.
When they signed Hooper,
you're good.
They were like, we were going to go with two tight end sets. And then it was like, oh, they might trade Njoku, right? And I was like, my brain was talking about O.J. Howard, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, David Njoku, like there have been rumors about him possibly being traded. If I was him, I request a trade too. But every time there's some kind of rumors floating around David Njoku getting possibly traded, the Browns come out and say we're going to run with two tight ends. And it's like,
I mean, because like that was the whole game plan for the Browns, and like on the field that would be great. An improved offensive line and two tight end sets, and they're just going to run it with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt all day like that. That feels like a great game plan. But if Njoku wants out, that kind of hurts Cleveland football wise. But just fantasy wise, like if you're a dynasty owner and you have David Njoku, it's great if they were to trade him,
especially if he goes to New England.
He goes to the Packers.
I mean, I don't like any tight end that goes to the Packers, if we're being fully honest.
Like, he would be the second option on that team behind Devontae. Like, he would actually get a lot of work. More than Cleveland.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, he'd get a lot of work in Jacksonville.
For sure, better than Cleveland. But not as... I just don't like I said, the Packers' tight end landing spot has never been, like, great.
Yeah, it's
for fantasy football. Real life.
When have they ever had a great tight end? And like Jimmy Graham, at this point in his career, was not a good tight end.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, I don't know if they've ever even had a really high-powered or a big name tight end in Green Bay, other than Jimmy Graham. In recent memory, at least.
The Bills' official website confirms that the team wants to run Zach Moss in a similar role to Frank Gore. What did we tell you? Surprise, surprise. Big thing is Devin Singletary is getting the same amount of work, so that's good news.
So that's the thing. Like, people will look at this and say, see, he's going to eat up Singletary. If they're referring to Zach Moss taking Frank Gore's work in the beginning of the season, then sure, when Frank Gore was getting
not even the beginning.
18,
Well, yeah, you're right. Never mind.
Carries a game. But after like week 6 or 7, Frank Gore was getting like 5, 6, 7, 8, like that range.
But even when you look at the totals on the whole season, I mean, Singletary can still hit 250 touches next year and not have a problem.
Absolutely. Yep.
So it's like when you look at the Bills and what they do, they're like the Baltimore Ravens light.
Yeah, they are.
To run the football. I mean,
absolutely.
And Zach Moss helps that. He's going to be a third down back that gets goal line work. You know what I mean? And
Zach Moss is going to be the Gus.
Does that hurt Devin Singletary's ceiling? Yes. Like, of course, him not getting red zone work. Yeah, of course, that's going to hurt his ceiling. But if you're getting 200 to 250 touches, I mean, you could become a low end RB1, which is very helpful for your fantasy team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I still think Singletary can, like you said, his ceiling is limited because of Zach Moss, but I still think it's possible for him to finish between like a RB10 and RB15, which if you're getting him in like the 5th round,
fair.
That's great, really good value, considering the fact that a lot of good running backs are off the board in the 5th round.
Yeah. And then the final piece of news, and the biggest piece of news, what I was referring to early in the episode, we got some news this afternoon. We're recording this on a Monday, and on Monday afternoon, the Chiefs signed quarterback Patrick Mahomes to a 10-year extension on top of the 2 that he already has. So Patrick Mahomes is signed for 12 years. The rumored number of dollars he is going to acquire over the next 12 years is $420 plus million. And I guess how much he gets a year depends on how much cap the Chiefs have at that point. So it's going to be varied. But I would assume, if you were just to do a little math here, $420 million divided by 12 is $35 million a season, which right now at 100, what is the cap, 120?
I think so.
I don't even know. But it's like there's only 90 million left for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean,
you have to sign 53 more, 52 more players.
Yeah, they're betting on the fact that the cap's going to go up by at least like 10 mil.
Yeah, it will. But so
I
the early portion of the contract will probably be lighter, which will be good for the team. But in 4 years, they're going to be drained financially.
Right. Yeah.
But that's huge. It's 10 years. Good Lord. He's going to be the quarterback of the Chiefs and through his age of 36, 2031.
I was going to say, though, like, if you're the Chiefs, that's not even like no deal with Patrick Mahomes is a bad deal. And
I'm not saying the Chiefs are dumb. I'm just saying, like,
no, I agree though. They're gonna struggle now at other positions if the cap doesn't skyrocket, which it might, to be honest. But no, but now you have Mahomes locked up until he's 36, which is, I believe, the same age as Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
So like that's perfect for the Chiefs. I mean, he's going to be their guy for the next decade.
That's massive news.
But yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I need a nap. So let's move into our top bounce back players. And
sure.
As we promised you earlier this offseason and haven't followed it at all, we're going to try to keep this inside 30 minutes.
Going to do our best.
Do our best. So let's start off with the first guy. He had a relatively shaky 2020 campaign between injuries and in half PPR. Yeah, in half PPR, I think he was 12, but in between injuries and just lack of efficiency offensively, Alvin Kamara ended up as the number 12 running back in half PPR.
Disappointment.
Very, very large disappointment, more specifically because I almost took him 2 in our home league, and I took him like 3 or 4 in a lot of other leagues that I was playing in professionally, and then not professionally, but for cash. And he ended at number 12, which is a huge hit to your team. And he was only averaging roughly 15 fantasy points a game, which totals like right in the middle, like RB 7 or 8, which is not what you drafted. You know what I mean? So he was a very disappointing. And I talked about him last year as a player that doesn't really, he's not a guy that gets like, when Gurley was really good, or when CMC, right now, he's really good, right? They're getting like 2,000 yards. They're getting like 1,800 to 2,000 yards total on the season. And Alvin Kamara was not one of those players. When I looked at his stats last year and I was trying to decide between him or Zeke, he's a guy that gets you, you know what I mean? Like in 2018, one of probably the best year of his career, he had 883 rushing yards and 709 receiving yards, which altogether, what is that, 1,500 yards, 1,600 yards maybe? What really gave him all of his fantasy points, productively, was his receptions. We had 81 in that year, and he had 18 total touchdowns. And I was like,
right, that's a big thing. Yeah.
If the 18 total touchdowns were to decrease, he was going to fall off a cliff, in the great words of Max Kellerman. Last year, he totaled 6 all-purpose touchdowns. I did not think he was going to decrease 12 touchdowns. I thought it was going to be like 6 touchdowns and he would get 12 all-purpose.
Right.
And he only got 6 last year. Had he played another game, he might have gotten 7 or 8. But it was a big, big, big decrease from what he had the previous year. He also regressed in yardage and rushing yards and all that stuff, but it wasn't a huge regression. And to be honest with you, it was probably because of how many games he played. Had he played all of his games, he probably would have gotten up into that 600-700 receiving yards range and 800-900 rushing yards range. So he's the same player. I mean, in 2019, guess how many receptions he had? 81. So he's the same player. He just didn't get as many rushing touchdowns as he did last year. And you can blame that on whatever you want. Michael Thomas catching more touchdowns last year than people would have thought. I don't know. I don't know what you want to peg it on. Maybe Drew Brees getting hurt, or just people focusing on Alvin Kamara now they don't have Mark Ingram. You would think he would score more touchdowns this year just purely off the fact that that is the case. But I think when you look at him, positive regression in the touchdown category is for sure going to happen. And I think that in and of itself will lead to his big bounce back for 2020.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I think it's just luck and just the way it goes for touchdowns. Like, I don't think it was really anything in particular of why he only had 6 total touchdowns last year compared to 18 in 2018. I mean, he's had 81 catches in every year of his career. So it's safe to assume he's going to get around 80 catches again. It's safe to assume he's going to get around 1,600 total yards. And then, I've talked about Kamara multiple times on the show, but I'll just reiterate my points. He played in 14 games last year. So assuming he plays a full 16 and he gets around 80 plus catches, he gets around 1,600 total yards, and he's going to get more than 6 touchdowns. I'm very confident in saying that. His rookie season, he had 12 total touchdowns. 13 total touchdowns. Then he had 18 total touchdowns. Then he had 6. The anomaly here is the 6. I'm not saying he's going to get 18 again. But
all he's got to do is get like 12 to 14 and he should be okay.
Exactly. And I think that's what he will do. And if he does that, he's going to be a top 5 running back in fantasy. I mean, last year he was the RB12 and half PPR. He did, like I said, miss 2 games. His points per game average was about 15 points per game, which I think was in the top 10. So if you just bump that up a little bit with touchdowns, he's going to be in the top 5.
Now, where do you have him projected total touchdowns?
I think it's like 12.
I think I have him at 15 all-purpose right now, which is high. And he's the RB6.
You have him at 15? He's the RB6?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's because I only have him at 864 rush yards and about 599 receiving yards. It's just because everyone else is better. Yeah. Like Zeke's at 278 and Drake is at 289. So, I mean, he can easily get in the top 5. It's easy.
Yeah. I have him at 13. 13 total touchdowns, and he's fourth in my projections for running backs.
Okay.
But he's only
that's
2
fair.
points off the third guy.
Yeah, I think projections, we're projecting if a player was to play all 16 games, and so if that obviously completely changes, you have a different reality. But anyway, yeah, Alvin Kamara, definitely a bounce back player. He's going to be a lot better this year than he was.
He also had 4 fumbles last year,
which is what, 8 points?
I don't think he lost all of those. That's just total fumble. I think he lost 2 of them.
Okay.
But before that, I don't think he's ever lost a fumble in his career.
Now, I wanted to look up, just give me 1 second, to go into our draft guide. And give
draft guide plug.
Yeah, always. Every episode's going to have a draft guide plug about 14 times. But I wanted to give you, we have this thing called the Fantasy Point Analysis System. And it breaks down your fantasy point totals by statistics. So how many fantasy points they got on yards, rushing yards, passing yards, receiving yards, all of that stuff. It's broken down.
How much a player relies on touchdowns.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's all in the draft guide. You can see it there. But the biggest thing I wanted to pull up was Alvin Kamara and where he stood in the half PPR reception and yards category last year. It looks like he was RB9 in yards and receptions last year. And then overall, he was the RB, was it 12 in fantasy football?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think the biggest thing for him is obviously the touchdown totals. And if they increase, that'll push him up to 5, 4 in a finish next year. So he'll finish number 4, number 5 or something like that next year if he gets that opportunity to score as many touchdowns as he had in the past. But I don't think he's going to get 18. And I think he's capped by touchdowns, unfortunately.
Sure. But
at the same time, he's still like, after you get past, Zeke, Saquon, and Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara is easily 4 or 5. You know what I mean? You're safe drafting him there. Like, it's not a big deal.
You have him third, don't you, ahead of Zeke?
Yeah, I think so. Zeke and him have the same problem. I have Zeke finishing ahead of him, but Zeke and him have the same problem of not scoring touchdowns.
Well, yeah.
So anyway, but Alvin Kamara, he doesn't top our list. This is in no particular order, but Alvin Kamara, bounce back player. Number 2 on our list, you were a little bit hesitant on this man, and you can give me the reasons why. But David Johnson comes in at number 2. Now, the big thing about David Johnson, and I think you have to really, I'm having a tough time because there's 3 players. Todd Gurley, David Johnson, and Le'Veon Bell that are all on, I guess you could call them old running backs. I don't know what you want to call them, but they're both out of what you maybe would say out of their fantasy prime. And they have a chance maybe to come back into that, top RB1, maybe top 6 running back area if they have a good season. And I thought about it the other day. I'm like, here's how this is going to work. One of those 3 guys is going to be an RB1, maybe top 5. One of those guys is going to end up being a low-end RB1, probably 10 to 12. And then one of those guys is going to completely crap his pants and not do good. All 3 can't be success. Like, I hate to say that, but it's just all 3 are just not going to be a success. One guy is going to have a really great season. I'm trying to peg which guy that is. We have 2 of them on this bounce back list, but David Johnson tops it out. Now, I want to give you what David Johnson was at through weeks 1 through 8, where he was ranking, or 1 through 7. I'm sorry. David Johnson was the RB 10, I believe. No, he's RB 8 through weeks 1 through 7, and then he got hurt or something happened, and he wasn't the same running back. And then over the second half of the season, Kenyon Drake took over the job. They weren't giving David Johnson any work, and when he did come in to run, he looked like they sawed his legs off and attached to fake ligaments to his body, and he couldn't run. Like, you know what I mean? So it was just very concerning when you were looking at David Johnson. It looked like they were rushing him back, and they didn't really need to. The big thing is that he's back in Houston. or not back in Houston. He got traded to Houston in a horrible trade. But the trade is not what we're talking about, right, Rick?
No. We're not referring to the trade. We're referring to the player.
No. So last year in 2019, right, the Houston Texans gave Carlos friggin' Hyde 245 rush attempts. Carlos Hyde had 1,000 yards rushing last year.
He did.
That's disgusting. Now, David Johnson's going to come in. There's no more Lamar Miller. Duke Johnson is still there, but he's kind of worthless in a lot of ways. And David Johnson is a pass-catching back. You know what I mean? Like, they're not just going to... They didn't bring him in just to rush like Carlos Hyde. They wanted a multi-purpose back. Yes, Carlos Hyde's going to get some passing game work because last year he had 62 catches, but David Johnson can do that. So I could see David Johnson in the realm of 40 to 50 catches. I could see him getting 225 to 240 rushing attempts and finish off his 2020 season, I should say, with maybe 275 to 300 touches total. And if he hits that ceiling, right, he might have 14 to 1,500 all-purpose yards, and he might get 8 to 12 touchdowns. And it's like, if that happens, that makes David Johnson, who right now is going in the 4th round, a top 10, top 8 running back in all of fantasy football. And I think he can be way more efficient than crap Carlos Hyde. And through that time in the early half of the season last year, David Johnson looked like David Johnson. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, for me, it looks like, David Johnson's now way down the list. He's in Houston. I would say, Houston's way better than Arizona was last year. They have a better offensive line. They have a better quarterback. They have a lot of things that are better in Houston than...
I like Kyler Murray.
I like Kyler Murray, but do you like Kyler Murray over Deshaun Watson?
Veteran Deshaun Watson.
So I'm just saying, like, the offensive line is better. Even the receiver core is not better anymore because you traded Hopkins away, but you get the point. Right. The offense is going to probably be better than, the Arizona Cardinals next year. So I think in a good offense that doesn't have a crappy offensive line, David Johnson can have some success. He needs a good offensive line to have success and move the ball, and that's what he's going to get. So that's why I like him this year. Bounce back player. What are your thoughts?
So before I start my counter argument to everything you just said, I will start by saying I do like David Johnson for this year.
Okay.
Not really future, but for this year, I do like him, and I would take him in like the 5th round.
Okay.
Now, granted, here's my argument against David Johnson, though. So his yards per carry throughout his whole career has been very poor. Even
he's not a good running back. You look at all of his rushing metrics, it's scary as frick. But when he has a good offensive line, he's good.
Yeah, since he's been like a workhorse, he's averaged 4.2, 3.6, and 3.7 yards per carry. Last year, Carlos Hyde averaged 4.4 yards per carry. So if you want to make the argument that if the offensive line is much better, then David Johnson can get that number up to like 4.4,
right,
in that range. Then I think you have an argument to be made, but I'm not 100% confident in it. Probably just because I haven't seen it. David Johnson's also going to be turning 29 this year, and he's got some old legs. Now, if they do use him, like if they do give him like 260 carries and he gets like 50 receptions, 50, 55, 60 catches, like in that range with 250, 260 carries, and I think he's going to be really, really good. But if they don't give him that, then he's going to be
who's it going to
for a lot of people. So if you look at last year, like if they just do the same, like let's say they do the same thing they did last year, right? And they give Duke Johnson like 85 carries and 44 receptions, and they give David Johnson 245 carries, and let's say we bump his receptions up because they didn't use Carlos Hyde at all in the offense for receiving. So let's say David Johnson gets 245 carries and like 40-ish catches, then I think that's probably going to be good for David Johnson. I don't think his value wouldn't be like top 10 running back though. Yeah. But it would be worth the 4th or 5th round value, which is I think what they're going to do. I think they're going to use David Johnson the same as Carlos Hyde last year and just give him a little bit more receiving work. Mm-hmm. But if they give Duke Johnson like any more work than he did last year, it's going to be a problem for David Johnson.
See,
and I'm not even saying they're going to split because I don't think they'll split. But if it's like Johnson gets like 100 carries and 50 catches.
What doesn't make any sense for me is that Carlos Hyde is an old man too, and there's no reason why they wouldn't have given Carlos Hyde more work. Like for me, there's a lot of scenarios with, like, if you're worried about how much work David Johnson's going to get next year, you shouldn't be. And that's the big thing. Even through the air, because the big thing is they spent a crap load to get David Johnson on their football team. Like a lot. It was stupid, but it shows you that they want
the workhorse back. Sure.
They want the workhorse back. They want a guy they can use through the air and on the ground and not have to swap out. And yes, he's an old man. Yes, he might get hurt. That's always a concern. But in the fourth round, I mean, he's an obvious bounce back to me. I don't think.
I think I am with you. I think he's going to get the work.
Yeah.
And I would take him. But are you confident that even if he gets if he gets the same amount of carries Carlos Hyde, it's 245, can he get like 4.4 yards per carry? Like, is he going to rush for 1,000 yards, even with 245 carries? Like, I don't know if he will.
He's a better running back than Carlos Hyde, probably. Yeah. Plus, I think schedule matters too.
Yeah, I mean,
especially for David Johnson. Especially for David Johnson.
Schedule does matter, but I don't know if he's a better pure runner than Carlos Hyde at this point in his career. I really don't. I'm down on the player, David Johnson.
I mean, it's fair, but if Carlos Hyde was as good as David Johnson was at all, I think David probably have a starting job
back. But just pure running, I don't know. I think they're at least even, I'd say.
So as far as the running back position is concerned, Houston has it looks like a top 12 schedule against running backs.
Yeah, so that's solid.
Pretty easy.
That's very solid.
Fantasy Pros gives it 3 stars. But yeah,
I do like that.
I think David Johnson, and like you said, the 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9 yards per carry that he had in Arizona, that's concerning. And I have never liked David Johnson as a running back really that much. I mean,
you said for years.
When you look at his numbers, right? Let's just look at his efficiency numbers. He was number 55 in yards per carry last year. He was number 45 in breakaway runs. He was number 54 in evaded tackles. He was number 51 in juke rate, number 28 in big hits. Like, the guy literally, he doesn't lead in one rushing category. And it's like, when you look at running backs, the one thing I like to look at is, like, are they, like, the statistics that, because a lot of times people will be like, oh, it's the offensive line. Of course it's the offensive line. But what statistics can they control to make them better? You know what I mean? And that's evaded tackles, that's juke rate, that's big hits. It's stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
That will make them better running backs. And when you're bottom of the league in almost every single category, it's concerning. And David Johnson's just always been like that. Like, he's never been good in any of those categories. The times David Johnson was good were when they had a good offensive line and the offense was moving the ball, right? So when they're more focused on Deshaun Watson and trying to keep him in the pocket and trying to make sure he doesn't, get a breakaway run, or he doesn't, throw a touchdown to Brandon Cooks or whatever it may be, they're going to try to stop Deshaun Watson. And last year they weren't focused on Kyler Murray. They were focused on David Johnson for the majority of the first half of the year. And then when Kyler started to figure it out, right, it started to get better. So it's like, and Kenyon Drake benefited from that. So I really do believe, like, David Johnson has the ability to be a good running back. He's not spectacular. He's Jordan Howard, but people just put a shiny turd on him and they polish him off and say he's a good running back.
He's the only guy on this list that I'm a little iffy about, but I'd still think where he's going, it's worth the risk, especially with the amount of running backs that are going off the board in the first 3 rounds.
Let's talk about a wide receiver next. A man by the names of Adam Thielen. Now, Thielen, man, I looked at the numbers in the second half of the year, and Thielen pooped himself. He literally pooped all over himself in the second half. He was so bad. It's not even funny. Like, he completely vanished. He was the wide receiver. Where are you, Adam Thielen? He can't be this far down every time. He
only played 10 games, and he did not have a great year in those 10 games.
Yeah. But he did not. The concerning thing for me, and I've had trouble all offseason with, is this the new Adam Thielen? You know what I mean? He's 29 years old. Was that his cliff? You know what I mean? Because weeks 1 through 9, I'm sorry, I meant to say weeks 1 through 9, he wasn't great. You know what I mean? The weeks that he did play.
So I have a counter argument to that.
Okay. I'll just let me give you the Adam Thielen numbers in the weeks 1 through 9 before he got hurt. He was the wide receiver. Oh my God, Adam Thielen! Why do you have to be so far down this list? He can't be in the 50s. There's no way.
Oh, he probably was.
He had some really good games. Wide receiver 19. He was wide receiver 20 because he tied with Allen Robinson. So, with 94 fantasy points. So he was a low end wide receiver wide receiver 2 last year, which is not horrible if you have a second wide receiver. It's not bad. But he wasn't getting, for some reason, obviously we know why he wasn't getting the same opportunity. It was because they went straight to rushing the football. But even after they started realizing that they needed to pass the football to have some form of success, they still weren't targeting him that much. Like when you look at like weeks 7 through 16, the last 4 games he played, he had 2 targets, 1 target, 3 targets, and 4 targets. You know what I mean? And even like his highest target total on the year was 8. He did that 3 times in 3 separate games. And it's like, you know, I want a guy who, especially who plays in the slot for a team that throws it to the slot, and Kirk Cousins who likes to throw it to the slot, to throw it to Adam Thielen, your slot receiver, 11 or 12 times. The fact that they drafted a slot receiver this year is a little bit concerning. Now, the reason why I think he's going to be a bounce back player is because I think that the Vikings were figuring it out last year. They were trying to figure out how much opportunity they wanted to give Kirk Cousins through the air and how much opportunity they wanted to give, Dalvin Cook on the ground. So it's like that split really was confusing and the line was blurred in the first half of the season. But as the season went along, it started to get a little bit more clear as to what they wanted to do. And they started passing the ball a little bit more. So I don't think they're going to just run the football every single play. They need to have a passing game, and I think they know that. And I think that's going to be beneficial to Adam Thielen. It's just gross when you look at his targets per game, and it was 4.8 last year, as opposed to the previous year where he was at 9.7 with 155 targets. I mean, if he doesn't get back up to that total, that's concerning. But I think the biggest factor that everyone kind of knows is that Diggs is gone. And Thielen's the guy. He's the only guy left in the passing game. So, I mean, yes, their new wide receiver is going to get a lot of work. Their rookie wide receiver is going to get a lot of work. But I think that you're going to be seeing Adam Thielen get back into that conversation of having 125 to 150 targets next year, which will get him back into that conversation. I think if he craps his pants this year, it's over for Adam Thielen at that point because he's 29. He's done. So
yeah, I would agree with that last point. I'd agree with everything you said. But my argument with Thielen, it's like I love Adam Thielen this year, and to explain last season, let's look at week 1. In week 1, the Vikings won pretty easily. You know how many times Kirk Cousins threw the ball in week 1?
Was it like 14?
He threw the ball 10 times.
Oh, my God.
He had 10 passing attempts the whole game. 2 of those went to, I think 3 of those actually went to Dalvin Cook.
You know what that says, Rick?
7 pass attempts to wide receivers and tight ends. Adam Thielen still led the team with 3 catches and 43 yards and touchdowns.
You know what that says?
What does it say?
That says that they really like Dalvin Cook and you should probably draft him.
Yeah, it does. But imagine if he gets held out and the Vikings decide to throw the ball more.
Oh, my God.
Adam Thielen would get like 20 targets a game.
Yeah. Draft Alexander Madison.
Yeah. They didn't throw the ball like at all last year. And week 2, Kirk Cousins only had 14 completions. He threw the ball a lot more that game. I don't know the target numbers, but he threw the ball more that game. He just stunk. He only had 14 completions.
Yeah, Thielen had 8 targets in that game.
He had 8 targets. He had 5 receptions. The next best receiver was Dalvin Cook. He had Stephon Diggs. He had 1. Dalvin Cook had 3, but I don't count him as a running back. So Thielen still led the team in receptions, still led the team in yards.
So why is that going to change?
What was it?
I said, why is that going to change?
It's not. It's absolutely not. And with Stephon Diggs gone and Justin Jefferson replacing him, Justin Jefferson is still going to get some targets, but he's not going to steal anything from Thielen as a rookie. And week 3 against the Raiders, Kirk Cousins only threw the ball 21 times, 15 pass attempts, and Adam Thielen once again was at least tied with Irv Smith for leading receptions, and he had a touchdown in that game as well. And then if you want to go to the games that Thielen missed, or some of the games he really struggled in, he only had 2. So he had consistently 8 to 5 targets, right? And games that the Vikings that he played in throughout the first half of the season, and the Vikings were typically only throwing the ball like 20 to 30 times, and he was still getting 5 to 8 targets, which I think is probably
right.
He's going to be about 7 to 8 targets because they figured out, like, we need to throw the ball, like you said, at some point in the season. That week was against after a poor week against the Bears. I think Kirk Cousins only threw the ball like 30 times. And then I think Stephon Diggs called him out or called the coaching staff out, if I remember correctly. And then the next week against the Giants, they threw the ball a lot, and Adam Thielen had 7 catches, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then if you look at throughout the rest of the season, when he finally had the hamstring injury, he left the game, and I believe it was the first quarter against the Lions. So he only had 2 targets in that game, but that's because he left the game. Against the Chiefs, if you remember correctly, he left the game in that one as well because he came back too early. So those 2 games don't even count, and that brings his target per game total down. And then the last 2 games of the season, you can just make the argument that he was unhealthy because of the hamstring. But for the majority of the season, he still actually
so if you take
like Adam Thielen.
What about, so you said in week 7 against Detroit, why did he only get 2 targets?
He got hurt. That was where the hamstring injury started.
Okay, all right. So if you go through, I just want to see weeks 1 through 6. I want to see where he landed.
And they didn't even start throwing the ball until like week 5.
Adam Thielen was the wide receiver. Oh, he's even worse than I thought it was. Wide receiver 9. Yeah, so he wasn't bad. Fantasy football can change on a dime, my friend.
And I think that's where he's going to finish this year, around that range.
Okay. I mean, I think I personally think they're going to pass it a little bit more this year than they did last year.
And if they do, that's even better for Thielen.
I know, and that's kind of why I think Thielen's going to have a bounce back year, is just because I think they'll pass it slightly more. I mean, it's still going to be that 50-50 split that they like to go with, but with no Adam Thielen and, Justin Jefferson probably getting, I would say 80 targets is safe. You know what I mean? In that ballpark.
Sure. He might even get more, but around 80. Yeah.
But you could see Thielen getting back up. I mean, over the course of those games, I you know what, just for kicks and giggles, let's prorate Adam Thielen's first 6 games really fast. I'll do that. But yeah, I don't see Adam Thielen falling off a cliff, and you make some valid points, but the 4.8 yards, like if you just look at that, you start to throw up in your mouth a little bit, and you're like,
there are some gross things with Thielen, and that is one of them. Age is another. The Vikings' offensive play style.
1 through 6, he was pacing at 101 targets with 69 receptions, 976 receiving yards, and 13 touchdowns, which the touchdowns total would, probably equal out a little bit. That's 100 fantasy points on receptions. About, I want to say, was it 35 fantasy points on receptions? So, you're already at 135 fantasy points. You add 16, about 70 more fantasy points. He's at around 200, which is a wide receiver 9. So that's exactly where you should finish. Yep. I'm going to take that first game out and give you weeks 2 through 6, which was 112 targets, 74 receptions, 134 yards, and still 13 touchdowns. So, I mean, he's there. Is he there enough that he's going to get back to 125, 130, 140 targets? I don't know. Does he soak up that much of Stefon Diggs' target share that it boosts him from pacing out at 105 targets to 150 targets?
If he gets 150 targets, he's probably going to be like a top 6, top 7 fantasy receiver. I'm at like 120 targets, so that's why I have him like 12th. And that's partly due to age and the Vikings play style, but he's still
that's normal.
Still very, very good. I think I have him 11th actually.
But like even when you look at what Diggs did last year over the course of the whole season in his, he played 15 games. He had 94 targets. So I think, when you talk about a full 16 games going to Adam Thielen, that's 100 targets for Stefan Diggs, paced out, 100 targets for Adam Thielen. I mean, I could totally see 30 total targets going to Mr. Justin Jefferson, and then maybe 50 more of Diggs targets going to him, which would total 80, leaving 30 uncharted targets on the team, which would go to Adam Thielen. So 135 targets is not a hard thing to project for Adam Thielen. And if he gets that total, then he's definitely going to bounce back. I think the one concern that I do have is just how much the Vikings are going to pass and his age.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Age is the biggest concern for me.
Let's move on to Juju Smith-Schuster because we don't have a lot of time left. But Juju, we've talked about a million times. Last season, he had a tough time. I think he was we talked about him on our ranking show, but he had a very tough season in 2019 after a lot of pundits projected him to be a breakout star wide receiver 1. I thought he was going to be a top 5 guy. I was projecting him top 5. And it was just because he had 160 targets in the season before. And it's like when you have that kind of target share and you had the kind of success that you had in the Steelers offense, the only thing that he was lacking was touchdowns, and that was because Antonio Brown was there. With Brown gone, the assumption was Juju Smith-Schuster kind of assumes the target share in the red zone.
Targets.
Right, 200 targets. No, he was going to stick around 160 or 170. But it was just the red zone target share that he was going to get that Antonio Brown was getting when he was in Pittsburgh. So with Juju getting that's what was going to see an increase for him statistically. And then, week 1, he had 8 targets, I think it was, against the New England Patriots, and he had a decent game. I don't believe he caught a touchdown, but he had a decent game. And then, Big Ben went down. And from then on, it was just a disaster for Juju. He ended up with the wide receiver 31 or something like that. He was way off the list.
Yep.
And he had a very, very bad season. And I, it's all attributed to the quarterback position. Like for me, there is a group of people that are like, Juju's is not good, and that's why he wasn't successful. And it's like, no, he just wasn't good because his quarterback freaking sucked. And it's like that's kind of what the whole situation was. You had Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph as your quarterbacks, and Big Ben coming back. I mean, we have an article coming out soon by one of our writers about Big Ben's arm injury and how that might affect him. And you'll see that and all that, the injury and all of that stuff in there, and whether it affects Big Ben. But Juju Smith-Schuster, if Big Ben comes back, roaring beer belly and all like normal, Juju Smith-Schuster could have a really great season this year. I'm not projecting top 5, but 7, 8, or 9 is definitely possible. He'll get over 150 targets. I mean, it's just how the Pittsburgh Steelers offense runs with Ben Roethlisberger in it. So a bounce back is coming for Juju, and you should probably buy onto the train now before it's too late.
Yep. You want to hear something very interesting with Juju?
What's that, my friend?
One of my favorite stats that's in favor of Juju for 2020. The Pittsburgh Steelers last year with Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges, and Ben Roethlisberger, and even Jalen Samuels, who had 5 pass attempts, probably on trick plays.
Yeah.
They threw the ball 510 times last year. So not a lot. They were a run-heavy team. They ran the ball about 400 times. So it was kind of even. They threw the ball a little bit more, but overall 510 pass attempts is not crazy. Right. In 2018, with a fully healthy Ben Roethlisberger, the Pittsburgh Steelers threw the ball 689 times.
Wow.
If they throw the ball with Ben Roethlisberger now as a starting quarterback again, if they even throw the ball 600 times, so let's say they don't throw it 510, but they don't throw it like 690 either because Ben Roethlisberger is kind of getting older, but they still throw the ball more because they're comfortable with Ben Roethlisberger versus Duck Hodges.
Right.
Juju's going to explode. I mean, he had, like you said, 166 targets with Antonio Brown on the team. Antonio Brown is gone now. In the first game last year, he was getting guarded by Stephon Gilmore all game. They quote unquote locked him up, and he still had 8 targets and 6 catches. So it wasn't like he was irrelevant. He was still Big Ben's go-to guy. I want to see what I projected for the Steelers, if I can find them as a team. I have them. Yeah, I have Ben Roethlisberger throwing the ball 570 times this year. So that is still much less. That's over 100 times less than 2018 season, when last time he was fully healthy. Yeah. And I still think Juju can get like 150 to 160 targets a game.
I have Big Ben at 577.
If he does that, Juju's still going to get like 150, 160 targets. And if they throw the ball anything like they did in 2018, dude, I'm telling you, Juju will be a top 5 fantasy receiver.
Yeah. I mean, right now I projected him at 216, ranked number 7 overall, with 154 targets, 100 receptions. I mean, he's efficient when he has a quarterback throwing to him, and he's a good wide receiver. Like, yep. If somebody's trying to tell you otherwise, don't listen to them. Like, draft Juju Smith-Schuster all day. He's going to bounce back this year. It was not his fault that he sucked last year. And I think the efficiency is going to be there. I mean, he's one of the better, like when you look at his numbers in, 2018, because that really is the indicator. That's the common denominator for a lot of the projections on Juju, because last year he struggled. You know what I mean? Like, and yes, it was because of the quarterback, but I think, there are other factors involved, because you could make the argument, Deontay Johnson had a decent year. And it's like, yeah, I mean, he still wasn't that good either. But in the season prior, he had 1.78 fantasy points per target, which if you were to pace him at that, 100, give him a couple more touchdowns and pace him out at that 150 target share, he ends up as a top 7, top 6 wide receiver easy. And like you said, if that offense gets better, I mean, where are the targets going to go? If you throw it 575 times with Big Ben, where are those targets going to go? They're not going to go. They're not all going to go to James Conner. They're not all going to go to,
Deontay Johnson could still get like 90 targets.
No, I know, but it's like, Deontay Johnson's not going to get targeted 165 times.
No, he's not.
It's going to go to Juju. And it's like, whether people like it or not, Juju's going to get a targeted 150 times. And if he doesn't work out this year with Big Ben as his quarterback, then I will write off the Juju ship for the rest of my life. But like, I just don't see it happening. Juju is a good wide receiver with 150 or more targets. He's a top 6, top 7 wide receiver easily.
I 100% agree. And even with like Eric Ebron there, like Eric Ebron can get his 60 targets. Vance McDonald could get like 30 plus targets. I even have James Washington getting around 80 targets and Deontay Johnson getting 90 plus targets. I still have Juju getting over 150 targets. Like, it's, and that's like low end if the Steelers throw the ball 570 times. If they throw the ball 600 times, like Juju is gonna be a beast.
Let's talk about Todd Gurley really quickly. End the show. Let's try to do this in 3 minutes.
Okay.
But Todd Gurley comes in at last on our list. And like I said, no particular order, but Todd Gurley is last. I looked at some of the Devonta Freeman numbers from the previous year, and I wanted to see what, the Falcons gave him for, I don't know if he played all 16. I can't remember, but
he played 14 games.
Paced out to a full season. And I was like, what do the Falcons give Todd Gurley on a full season? And so what I came up with is 252 rush attempts in my projections. The biggest number was not how many rush attempts he had, because that's a lot. I mean, he could end up with 220, and I would not be surprised in the least. The big number was the 80-something receptions that they gave Devonta Freeman last year. I believe it was 80-something. Let me just look it up. It was
paced out to that. He had I think 59 catches through 14 games.
How many targets?
70.
Okay, yeah. So for me, when I look at Todd Gurley, I projected him at 72 targets, so I decreased what the pace was for Devonta Freeman by 10. And then I did Todd Gurley's normal catch rate, which ended up in 55 receptions. That's the biggest area. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they said that usually top 5 running backs in fantasy football through weeks 1 through 16, not including week 17, a top 5 running back almost always has 50 or more receptions. Almost always. There's not usually in half PPR and PPR, there's not usually a running back without 50 or more receptions.
Like Derrick Henry,
maybe,
and then like maybe Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb. But one of those guys are going to have insane years.
Insane years on the ground.
If you're not one of those two guys,
right.
You're probably not going to do it.
So for Todd Gurley, he's going to get 70-plus targets this year, and he's going to get his 50-plus receptions. So that's the first category. I done give him nothing in efficiency. Right now I have him 1,400 yards with over 300 touches. That's gross. I mean, it's not gross. 1,400 all-purpose yards is pretty good, but it's not what you anticipate a guy who's getting 300-plus touches. So the big thing for Gurley that I see, because if you put all those numbers together, it gives him enough to get him into the top 10. If you give him 15 or 16 touchdowns like he had in the years that he was the RB1 in fantasy, Todd Gurley can get into the top 3, because I know for a fact the Falcons aren't going to be efficient on the ground. It's just going to happen. Like Gurley might reach 900 rushing yards, but it's going to be one freaking gross 900 rushing yards. So they're just not going to be efficient on the ground. Where they're going to be efficient is through the air. Gurley will get his work through the air. And I think it'll ultimately end up with Todd Gurley being the RB 9, 8, maybe 10, in between that range. And if he scores a lot of touchdowns, he could get back to where he was. I mean, the man's only 25 years old. So it's not like he's out of his prime. You know what I mean? He might just be entering his prime, and he had a bad year because the Los Angeles Rams offensive line was atrocious last year.
I wouldn't say he's entering his prime, but he could still technically.
No, I mean, like he's in the middle of it is what I meant to say.
Yeah, he could. I mean, running backs usually like, it's like 26 is where they start to fall off. I mean, like you said, he's 25. So like he could be, this year he turns 26 during the season. I mean, he could still very well be in his prime and still have a very good season. I agree with you with that efficiency. He's not going to run the ball for 5 yards per carry this year.
Yeah. By
any means, he's probably going to run it for around like 4 yards per carry. But he's going to get like 50, 55 catches.
Yep.
He's still going to get like 230-ish carries. And you add those two numbers up, and he's gonna get the workload. So just because of that, he should be worth a draft pick.
Yeah, in the fourth and fifth round.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like Atlanta's gonna run him into the ground this year. It's a 1-year contract, so they're fully ready to just use Todd Gurley.
There's no one else there.
There is nobody else there.
Should be interesting.
It's definitely worth a pick.
Should be interesting. Sure. Those are our top 5 bounce back players: Alvin Kamara, David Johnson, Adam Thielen, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Todd Gurley III. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. You can get all of our projections, rankings, and analysis on every single one of these players in the draft guide. $25. Be sure to purchase. Don't forget to check out our website, thefantasychampions.com, and we will talk to you, my friends, on Thursday.
Later.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.